today by a few condolences which we need to share on this shir. In no particular order, but we would first of all like to wish a long life to Phyllis Stein on the sad loss of her husband, of Norman, who was a great tzaddik, very, very special man. And we want to wish her and her family long life. And please God, they should only know simchas going forward. We also want to wish a long life to Odette on the loss of her father. The neshama should have an aliyah. We wish her long life as well. And of course, we all join in actually dedicating today's shir to the founder of this shir, Joyce Chodos, who passed away just a few days ago. And Joyce, we all love and remember well, not only for the time that, and the number of times over the last number of years that she joined us, but as I said, actually being the founder of the shir. It was Joyce who actually originally put this shir together. And it was Joyce who saw to so much behind the scenes of the religious dimension and the spiritual things behind Witza, and there were so many other things that she did. I recollect with fond memories of a time many, many years ago when we at Chabad, under the Rebbe's direction, started a campaign for many Russians who had come out from Russia and were actually duped into coming to South Africa with promises of jobs. And it was, in fact, before Mandela's release, and it was campaigned in Israel and around the world as being a golden opportunity where the government would welcome white faces to South Africa and would let them in very, very easily. These people paid money and they arrived in their droves. It was probably the early 1990s. And these people were then abandoned. They were abandoned in hotels in Hillbrow and Berea by the people who had brought them out and taken their hard-earned cash. And they were stuck here. And the Rebbe instructed us, as with many around the world, they were sitting ducks and sitting prey for people everywhere, for charlatans who took them on and did this to them. And here in Joburg, to cut a long story short, we needed quickly to put together a group of people who would help them find employment, because the government eventually agreed that if we could find them gainful employment, they would, and they wouldn't be a burden on the state, that they would grant them permanent residence and temporary residence and work permits and so on. And immediately came to the fore a whole group of people, and in amongst them were Joyce and Herschel Chodos, who helped us out tremendously in campaigning, in helping, in contacting, in finding people jobs. It was tireless, it was at times thankless job that was done by this incredible group of people, but they were at the forefront. And so met Joyce all those years ago, and she was always an incredible lady, incredibly kind, incredibly generous with her time, and always with that spiritual compass and that direction of wanting things for the betterment of Jews and Judaism and Torah and Yiddishkeit and so on. And I know that they were stalwart members of the Glen Hazel community, great supporters of the late great Rabbi Tanzer, Alav Shalom, Zecher Tzadik Livracha as well, who they supported, and they worked hand in hand with in growing the Glen Hazel community. And so Joyce is a great, great loss to us all, and particularly to the shir that she started and she joined right up until the very last one that we had in last year. And we certainly miss her, and we wish her family, Arichas Yom, we wish them long life. And we dedicate certainly this shir, and maybe even we should do somehow to name the shir in the future in her honor, in her merit, but we'll talk to the powers that be about that at some stage. What I'd like to share with you today is actually a thought that crossed my mind not only in looking at the parshas that we're reading now, but the particular strange times that we're living in, which have become stranger once again. And then also thinking about the season that we're in, and perhaps coupling it with the day today, which is Rosh Chodesh. Today is the beginning of the month of Shvat. Today is Rosh Chodesh Shvat. And a Rosh Chodesh at the best of times is a significant time and a significant day. And how much more so when we're talking about the month of Shvat. And I hope that I can give you something to take away today that will be of use to you to think about over the coming days and the coming weeks, and perhaps over this coming Shabbos as well. So let's begin with an anecdotal introduction. I don't know if you all remember, but probably, oh wow, it must be 10, 15 years ago maybe, where Johannesburg had the most violent hailstorm at the time that we were sitting at a Pesach Seder. I don't know if you remember it, but I certainly remember that it was the only time that I can remember in our home that the hail was so harsh that it was smashing windows. Windows in our house were smashed. Now, I know that not always does the hail fall in the same place at the same time, even in a city like Joburg. We have what they always used to talk about on the weather, isolated thunder showers. When you have those isolated thunder showers, it can be hailing in Ilovo, but it can be dry in Glen Hazel. I know that, but I don't know if you guys remember. I have vivid memories of the Pesach Seder and running to the windows. Any one window that was open at the time got smashed, and there was glass flying, and there were hailstones, and there was huge an amount of hail that kind of bedecked our entire garden as you looked out of the window. And this all happened at the Pesach Seder. And it was kind of at the time that we were recounting the plagues, one of which, of course, is hail. And this hail fell and did damage to everybody's homes and, of course, to the gardens. And when it melted, there were tree branches and leaves everywhere. And you know how the leaves get smashed and they're actually in bits and pieces as they fall on the ground. It was something quite violent and something quite profound. And it all happened at the Pesach Seder. I remember then that sitting at our Pesach Seder, we had some guests who were extremely, extremely keen gardeners. And I can remember this elderly gentleman giving a lecture. He actually was a doctor, and he gave us a whole lecture there at our Pesach Seder about how good hail is for the plants. There we're looking out, and we see the desecration of the plants. We see the destruction. You see the leaves. You see the split leaves on the trees, and it looks like nothing on earth. And here he was, and he gave this talk to us, all brief, a few minutes. How long can you talk at a Pesach Seder and keep everybody's attention? For a few minutes about the special qualities of hail, that in the hail there's a certain combination of chemicals that you don't get just in rain, and that this is extremely good for the plants. And every now and then, you don't want it to happen every Monday and Thursday or every Shabbos, although it does seem to be that it rains every Friday night and Shabbos in Joburg. But the hail is so good for the garden. And, we kind of bore testimony to it, because once the garden was cleaned up and put back together, it was quite amazing to see what sprouted and what came up and how the plants seemed to flourish afterwards. So they'd taken this lashing, they'd taken this battering, and they recovered, they recuperated. Not only did they recuperated, but they came out much stronger afterwards as well. So it got me thinking about the whole concept, I guess, of the different plagues that we read about in this week's parsha, and thinking about how those plagues, each one of them, and we have discussed this at some length before, each one of the plagues was actually very direct, not only as a punishment, but it was very direct as a teaching for the Egyptians to learn from what they had done wrong, and at the same time a teaching for us, for the Jewish people who were going to be redeemed through these plagues. But it was a teaching for us to learn some fundamental principles that were underlying within our society that needed betterment, that needed improvement, that needed fixing. And clearly, the message was that these plagues weren't just a whipping, and they weren't just a lashing, and it wasn't just about punitive measures, it wasn't just about punishment, but in fact, it was a lot about what we can learn from it, how we can grow from it, how we need to take the lessons from these plagues and make sure we don't miss out on anything. Now, if we just pause there for a moment and think about the fact that we have just entered into a new month. Now, every time we enter into a new month, every time we have a Rosh Chodesh, I'm not sure if everybody is familiar with the fact that every Erev Rosh Chodesh is actually called Yom Kippur Katan. It is a little Yom Kippur. If it is an Erev Rosh Chodesh, that Yom Kippur Katan, and it's on a weekday, many actually fast at least half a day on that date. And there are certain penitential prayers that are said for this Yom Kippur. The Al-Chaitz, the Ashamnus, and so on are included. In fact, if you go to the Kotel, when you can go back to the Kotel, I guess, if you go to the Kotel on a Erev Rosh Chodesh, you see a lot of people who come together for this special prayer service that is held for Yom Kippur Katan. It's not everybody's custom. It's not something that is across the board. And it seems to be that it was only much later on in Jewish history that it became a day on which people fasted and so on. The Chabad custom is not to fast on these dates at all, but give a little bit extra tzedakah, a little bit of extra charity, and certainly a little bit of extra prayer and some other good deeds won't hurt as we go along that path as well. If the Erev Rosh Chodesh is a Friday or a Shabbos, the Yom Kippur Katan service was always brought forward to the Thursday before. And so this is Yom Kippur Katan, Erev Rosh Chodesh. So that would have been yesterday. Now, why? It is almost as though our sages felt fit to let us know that the month is coming to an end. We have to have a little Yom Kippur in which we pack away and package the spiritual trials and tribulations of the month that passed and cleanse ourselves and look forward to a turn into a brand new month, which brings with it a brand new spiritual makeup, a brand new atmosphere, something completely different from the month that came before. Now, when we think of the month of Tevet that we have just left, the month of Tevis is dominated by one particular date. It's a pretty empty month, other than, yes, the first couple of days are always in Hanukkah, but then Asara B'Tevis, the 10th day of Tevis, which was a few weeks ago. Remember, the Friday fast that went into Shabbos, the only fast that can occur on a Friday in the Jewish calendar is Asara B'Tevis. And this 10th day of Tevis was the day on which the siege of Israel began under, it was then Jerusalem was the whole known state of Israel, in fact, at that time. And this was under the dominion of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. It led some years later to the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, and it led many years later to the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash under the Romans. This was really the mark. Asara B'Teves was the beginning of Golus. It was the beginning of diaspora. Remember, we had gotten out of Egypt. We had come into Israel. We had occupied Israel. And now, for hundreds of years, our temple had stood. And for the very first time on Asara B'Teves, on the 10th day of Teves, all those years ago, under Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian dominance, all of a sudden, the Jewish people were under threat once again. Diaspora looked like it was going to become a possibility, and it certainly did become a reality a little bit later. And this was now Asara B'Teves. Domination of the month of Teves, therefore, seems to be a little bit down, a little bit downcast, a little bit sad, a little bit depressing, dominated by this idea of Teves, of the 10th of Teves, of Golus, of exile, and so on. When we turn today to the month of Shvat, the month of Shvat has a completely different atmosphere. And perhaps it would be interesting to explore for a moment what the month of Shvat is really all about. And let's go. First of all, to put it in perspective, the Torah doesn't call the months by their names that we know them. It's a strange thing. We know about Tishrei, and we know about Cheshvan, and we know about Kislev and Teves and Shvat and Odor and Nisan and Iyar and so on. We know those names, and we're used to those names. But the Torah does not refer to them by those names. The Torah refers to them by numbers. They are called the first month, the second month, the third month, and so on, right up until the 12th month, or in a leap year, the 13th month. That's what they're called. They're not called by these names. There are one or two exceptions along the way, and somewhere in Tanakh, some of the months are mentioned by their names rather than by their numbers. But it seems to be that from a Torah point of view, the numbers was the dominant thing across the board. The names of the months, if you look at it and you want to go and Google it, or you go and look in books like Sefer HaToda'ah, the book of our heritage, and so on, they will explain the background to the names of the months for in the Jewish calendar are actually Babylonian. They're names that came from Babylon. So these are, I don't know, Iraqi, Pakistani, Iranian names, somehow in their background, Babylonian names, that we came to adopt as the names of these months. Now, it seems to be counterintuitive in a way, because we're talking about, please listen to our Jewish calendar and what it dictates. Don't go to 2021 and tell me that that's the year. That's not the year. The year now is 5781. Don't tell me that now we're in January. January is a name given by the very antithesis of Judaism and Torah. This is not about, stay away from that. I often personally used to tease people and talk to them about, if people used to tell me, when's your birthday? You ask a Jew, when is his birthday or her birthday? And they give you a date, 12th of February, the 24th of March, the whatever. And, as a little bit of a knock, he would say, well, okay, but that's your Jesus birthday. I want to know what your Jewish birthday is. We don't go by Jesus. We don't go by the Christian calendar, and we try and persuade people not to. So what is this idea here of taking the months of the year and now for perpetuity? We have these months stated by their Babylonian names. Yes, we write that in Hebrew, agreed. But they are actually, Rubam Kekulam, almost all of them have their foundations only in Babylonian pre-Iran, Iraq, Pakistan language. That's where these names actually come from. Nachmanides, the Ramban, tells us that there's an interesting parallel in the days of the week, that each day of the week, every day of our week, we number our days in Torah thinking by a number, also not by a name. The Torah does not have a name for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We only have a name for Shabbat. We call it Shabbat or Shabbos. But all the other days of the week are, if you wish, build-ups or addenda to Shabbat. We talk about the first day of Shabbat. In fact, if you look in your davening, your prayer book, it's actually mentioned that way. We say Hayom Yom Rishon B'Shabbat, Hayom Yom Sheni B'Shabbat. We don't say Rishon B'Shavua, first in the week. We say the first in Shabbos. Sunday is the first day of the next Shabbos. Monday is the second day of the next Shabbos. Today we're on Thursday. It's the fifth day of this coming Shabbos. That's the way that we're conditioned. Shabbos is the dominant feature. Each day is working towards it. Similarly, he says, when we got out of Egypt, the way we were told by God to number our months was according to our getting out of Egypt. Getting out of Egypt was the starting point. And the month in which we quit Egypt was month number 1, which we know is Nisan. That's the time we celebrate Pesach. And now number your months according to when we got out of Egypt, when we became a nation, when we became a people, a cohesive people that Moshe Rabbeinu marched out of Egypt after the plagues, etc. Now we go forward in each month, counting from Yetziat Mitzrayim, from the getting out of Egypt. And so when we're on the month of Tishrei, we are 7 months from the time that we got out of Egypt. We're referring back to Yetziat Mitzrayim, to the getting out of Egypt all the time, just by the name of the month, or the way we number it. And then God says, now remember, Achodesh Hazeh Lachem, this is the month in which is marked Pesach. Every year you're going to start counting again. That will complete a year. And then when it comes to Nisan, you'll say, well, okay, at this time last year, or at this time 3,300 years ago, as we keep on numbering, this is the time that we got out of Egypt, and now we are so many months after the getting out of Egypt time. That's how we're going to run our months of our calendar. Nachmanides says, based on this, that our sages saw fit actually to adopt Babylonian names for the months once we got out of the Babylonian exile. So they were kind of changing the headspace a little bit. They were saying, well, we're not belittling the concept of getting out of Egypt, but we've got to remember that we didn't only get out of Egypt once. We got out of Egypt when we got out of Babylon as well. And we're going to continue getting out of Babylon. And so he says a fascinating and beautiful idea, that the months they adopted Babylonian names, not to in any way degrade or belittle getting out of Egypt, but to remind the Jews at the time that, hey, 1 second, exile and redemption is something that has continued. We went into exile again. It wasn't Egypt, it was Babylon. And we got out of that exile. And now keep on referring back to these exiles, but more importantly, to the redemptions from those exiles. And now, remembering the Babylonian exile, we're going to use the Babylonian names. And so each one of these Babylonian names actually has a meaning. Now, here's the beautiful surprise. The name Shvat that we have just gone into, the month of Shvat, actually, if you look it up and you want to know what the name means, it means lashing. Right? Let's picture the hail lashing the leaves on the tree. That's exactly what it's about, lashing. And not lashing, not, we take lashing as in something that the headmaster used to do that's outlawed now, but the headmaster used to do when you were naughty at school. You got a caning. No, we're not talking about that lashing, but rather lashing in terms of water, in terms of the rain. And why? Because Shvat was the time of real heavy downpours in Israel. And it was therefore the month of lashing rains that they were really talking about. And that was the name that was given to that month. In fact, our sages point out that the month of Teves actually marked in Israel the end of winter. When it came to, say, yesterday, according to Torah literature, yesterday was the end of harsh winter. But we now came into kind of after winter, lashing rains, heavy downpours. The lashing rains, and the idea of this lashing rain is conveyed in the name Shvat. So let's park that for a moment. And let's think of that relevance in terms of what we know that this month of Shvat really connotes and is really all about. Well, our sages in the Talmud tell us that the month of Shvat has got something significant to do with trees. Tu B'Shvat, the dominant feature of Tu B'Shvat is Tet Vav 15. It's the 15th of Shvat. So we'll still have an opportunity in a couple of weeks' time to address that and to talk about Tu B'Shvat in more detail. But it's the idea of what we call the new year for the trees. As we'll explain then, it's got very little to actually do with the physical tree, as much as it's got to do with the fruit of the tree, because it had to do with the taxes, the tithes, and so on, that had to be taken on the fruits that were brought in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. That's what New Year for the trees is actually all about. But this is the dominant feature of this month of Shvat. Now, we kind of start seeing a case being built here. We've got lashing rains, we've got trees and produce, and we've got in fact, we will study it at a later stage. The idea of the fruits was determined by the water, the rainfall of that particular year that we believe has fed those fruits. And it's from the 15th of Shvat that we kind of have that cutoff time for last year's benefit of blessing to this year's benefit of blessing. But be that as it may, we're talking about rain, we're talking about fruit, and then, surprise, surprise, if you look at each month in the calendar, there was added to the months kind of, I don't want to call them zodiac signs, but there's certain signs of the certain months. And believe it or not, the month of Shvat has as its zodiac sign, in inverted commas, water carriers. A water carrier, the guy schlepping the barrels on either side of the stick that goes around his neck or over his shoulder. That is the symbol of Shvat. It's a time of water carriers. It's a time of water. It's a time of rainfall. It's a time of rejuvenation, regrowth, and the blessings that are hidden within the rain that brings out the wonderful fruits that we're going to enjoy from this year's blessings. Which all combines, I guess, to give us a very, very beautiful picture of the exact juncture that we're standing at right now. Right now, we are looking at a world that is not only crazy from a godly point of view, but it's gone crazy from a human point of view as well. If I would have told you a week ago that you would be looking at people storming and invading the Capitol in Washington, you would have said it can't happen in America. But it did. If you would have said that, I don't know, I mean, yeah, maybe humorous, but that as we sit here today, Donald J. Trump is banned from Facebook and he's banned from from all the other media that has put a stop to his twittering and tweeting and doing all the other things that he does, or that he did so well throughout his dominion as the president of the United States. It's mad times. It's crazy. America is crazy. America is divided, and it's gone nuts, and it's nuts over COVID, and it's not, I don't know, there's like a strange atmosphere in the world. And then at the same time, you had Brexit, and so that the other super power on the Western front is in a strange situation. And then you have a strange undercurrent in Israel, where you're headed for another election, and you've got strange movements there as well. That, I mean, I just reading an article the other day, and I don't know that much about the politics, but that Gantz's party, where he was about to be the prime minister, they don't even know if it's going to make the threshold in this next election. And the one thing that you have to say is a person must be careful about what they say. I can remember Benny Gantz saying on the day that he did that the deals were done with Netanyahu about the shared prime ministership, he actually said, "I don't think I'll ever be the prime minister." I mean, you've got to be, like saying that Netanyahu won't let, but I don't know if that's what happened here. We're living in a very, very strange and peculiar time. And now we've got the strange thing where half of South Africa is you can't wait to get vaccinated. And I'm reading now 52 or 53% of South Africans won't take it or don't want it. And half of South Africa wants everybody to go back to school, and 53% of South Africans say they'd rather the kids stay home. We're living in a very, very peculiar time. I mean, if you think about it, people went away. This is don't mean any offense to anybody, but people went away on holiday, hoping to have a fantastic holiday in Cape Town and Plettenberg Bay. I've got news for you. I think the ones who stayed home in Joburg had a better time. They didn't have to fight with not having to go to the beach or not being able to socialize, etc., etc., etc. Maybe, yes, everybody needed a break, and we all needed that opportunity to clear our heads. But I've got a feeling that a lot of people came back from holidays a little bit more frustrated than when they went. And usually it's supposed to be the other way around. And now we've got to face a peculiar and a strange year. But against that background, let's just remind ourselves, as Nachmanides was reminding us as well with Babylon and Babylonian names, let's just remind ourselves that we've been here before. We've been here before. And if you don't want to believe that we've been here before, open this week's Parsha. Open up the Parsha. And open up this week and next week and just see. Plague after plague after plague. A change, well, let's start, okay. A change in government in Egypt starts the whole thing, right? So before the inauguration of the new president who didn't know, or the Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph, there's a whole lot of things that happen. And then the inauguration takes place, and he doesn't know Joseph, and the tides turn, and everything that we thought was so wonderful and pro-Israel is not so wonderful and pro-Israel or whatever, but it keeps on rolling. And then you get plagues, and these plagues and pandemics or whatever come to teach people lessons, but people don't learn the lessons. And then, surprise, surprise, towards the end of the whole story, you know what happens in Egypt just before we quit there? There's social uprising. There's insurrection. You know that they stormed the capital. You know that the firstborn of Egypt got wind of the fact that they were going to be the ones who would lie dead in the last plague, and they began a storming of the palace. They stormed the palace, and hundreds of people died. Yeah, that didn't happen, thank God. But hundreds of people died in the storming of the palace. And that was actually celebrated. It's celebrated by us, known as Shabbat HaGadol. Shabbat HaGadol, we commemorate the insurrection that happened in Pharaoh's palace that began the revolution. But what happened then? We got out of Egypt. What happened then was Geula, was redemption. And so in the midst of the plagues, and in the midst of the insurrection, and in the midst of this crisis of leadership and strange and peculiar times, what happened was Geula. Redemption followed very, very soon thereafter. And so we're living in a very, very peculiar and strange time. But we've been here before. We've been there, done that. What do they say? Been there, done that. And well, we're not allowed to wear T-shirts. We've got the button-down shirt. We've been there and done that. We've been through all of this before. It's called Golus. It's called diaspora, and it's called the end of diaspora, and it's called the end of Golus. And I don't know if you are thinking like I'm thinking, but there is so much that has changed. It's hard to think about how anything is actually going to go back, or everything is certainly not going to go back to the way that it was before. Things have changed. Think about it. So many people, for instance, have changed the way they work, but so many people have changed their jobs. So many people have, yes, they've lost their businesses and so on. And of course, we've seen terrible, terrible stuff, and people are going to be starving and all that kind of thing. We're not negating and we're not trying to belittle in any way. But so much has changed that I think that our world is a completely different place, and it will be a different place even after the inoculations, even after the vaccinations, even after all of that. We're going to have a lot of stuff that's going to be done in a very, very different way. We've got to make sure that we learned the lessons. We've got to make sure that we have heard the messages. We've got to make sure that we have understood the the nitrogen that's within the hail. I think it's nitrogen that's within the hail that can make the plants grow. We've got to make sure that we've understood that that is what this is all about. We've got to make sure that we've understood that Geula, that redemption, is something that is going to happen. We've got to make sure that we've understood that there is so much in this world that we cannot control and we don't control, and we're out of control. But we've got to put our thinking caps on and put our hearts and our minds and our souls back into truly where they should be and what we should be doing. So the message of Shvat is about this change and moving out of a negative space into a positive space. Yes, we've all laughed about the fact that it's been the worst thing during the last year to be positive, because it's taken on a completely different meaning. We've got to be positive in thought, of course, negative in testing, but we've got to be positive in our mindset, and we've got to be positive in our attitude and our outlook. And we've got to remember that this month of Shvat has been coined, they coined the phrase of it being a month where we say that it's Shenishma Besurot Tovot. Shenishma Besurot Tovot is Shvat, that we should hear, may we hear Besurot Tovot, good tidings. This is the month of good tidings. And there's history for that too. It was in this month, by the way, today. If you would go back today, tell me please, or think about it please, if we go back from today, 3,293 years, do you know what's happening? Go back. I'm not expecting you to remember it. I'm not saying you're that old. Go back 3,293 years ago today. And do you know what's happening? Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, is getting up to speak. And he started a speech that took him 37 days. It was the speech of his last testament. It was Moshe Rabbeinu delivering what we know as the book of Deuteronomy. He began it on Rosh Chodesh Shvat. And why was he giving that speech? Yes, Moshe Rabbeinu knew that he was destined to stay in the desert. He wasn't going to go into Israel. But he was lecturing the people who were. He said, you guys are a new generation. You're the people who are going to occupy Israel. You're the people now who are going to have the privilege of putting the Torah into action. You're going to have the opportunity to do the sacrifices in the temple. You're going to have the opportunity to bring your tithes from your first fruits. You're going to have the opportunity to see the way that Israel operates, and you're going to have the opportunity to really enjoy and see what Geula, what redemption is truly and actually all about. He began that speech today. And it went on for 37 days. Yeah, rabbis have often been criticized for speaking a long time. There's precedent for it. 37 days Moshe Rabbeinu spoke. And in those 37 days, he gave them over the entire Torah once again, teaching it to a generation that needed to be acclimatized, that needed their headspace fixed, that needed to be put into the mindset of the people who had stood at Mount Sinai to realize what they were actually going to and to explain it to them. And for them to understand that we are beginning today with our real Geula, with our real redemption. It starts today, Moshe said, or was telling them. I'm starting my lecture, he told them, today. Rosh Chodesh Shvat, it went on till, by the way, he passed away on Zayin Adar, on the 7th of Adar. That's the 37 days. So every day of the month of Shvat, Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching the Jewish people Torah. He was lecturing to them. He was teaching them. He was conditioning them. He was acclimatizing them for what redemption would be all about. He was getting them ready for that Geula, for that redemption that they knew from 40 years ago was going to happen, but they hadn't yet seen it and they hadn't yet realized it. So it's a power day today, and it's a power month that we're in. This month is full of hope, and this month is full of positive energy, and this month is full of besurot tovot, of good tidings, and this month is full of the lashing rain that we need to unpack and realize just how good it actually is for each and every one of us. And hopefully we'll be able to move forward in this month in leaps and bounds, in ways that we hadn't imagined possible. Because the time is coming for happy and wonderful and positive things. Let's not be stuck in the negativity of saying, hey, 1 second, but they're plagues. We know they're plagues, but every plague has some, I don't know, is it nitrogen or nitrates or whatever it is that's inside there that are actually good for your growth. They're actually good for your energy. They're actually good for your garden. They're good for things of a positive nature. And hopefully we'll be able to spend this month in all the good and wonderful and beautiful things that will lead us to a month of Adar, which comes afterwards, which is just full of joy. And then once again, to being able to celebrate Pesach. And yes, while practically speaking, if we're going to go the practical way, it looks as though we're going to have a bit of a lonely Pesach again, sitting at our Yom Tov tables, einer or zwei allein, with our matzahs and wine and our 4 questions and so on. But that's not the way that we're supposed to be thinking, unfortunately, because we're supposed to be realizing and remembering that last year we said, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, and that's this year now. We spoke about it last year. Yes, we spoke about it the year before and so on. But yeah, we've got to start believing it, knowing that L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. And I don't think they're going to make you take a COVID test before you go on the wings of Mashiach, of the eagles, to Yerushalayim. But if they do, we will, because we're ready and set to go and to get there as soon as possible. So hopefully we will not only have a turnaround month of Shvat, but we will also have a turnaround time of going from Golus to Geula, and may it happen speedily in our time. I want to wish you all a great Shabbos and a Chodesh Tov, a good Chodesh, filled with everything positive and beautiful and wonderful for you and for your families, and only rich and wonderful blessings. And all those who have experienced sad and difficult and tragic things over this time, should please God be comforted, and we should know no more sorrow, only good and wonderful tidings in the time that lies ahead. Amen. Take care. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Rabbi, I just want to tell you, I remember that hailstorm so clearly, but I know we make a joke of it. We were hit with a hailstorm, then we were hit into darkness because the lightning struck the electricity. And later,
by the way, I didn't bring up darkness. They announced load shedding again today. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Lovely. And then later that night, we actually had a home invasion. So we said we were even struck by the wild beasts.
Oh my goodness.
It really was a night of plagues.
Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Please God, we should only know good things.
Amen.
Sorry, Jill, you were saying something.
No, just was saying I also remember the hailstorm and sitting at that and thinking, oh, there's the hail. We've just talked about it. And I just wanted to tell you I'm still in Plettenberg Bay.
Okay, well, you haven't been to the beach, though?
No. No.
Okay, good. As long as you're obeying the rules. I'm
obeying the rules. I'm very good. The weather has aided that, I have to tell you. It's hardly been beach weather.
Really? Well, there you go. You see, look how kind God is.
Absolutely.
He made sure you didn't miss the beach,
But today's beautiful.
You know what? I'm also not going to the beach today.
Okay. Well, thank you and good Shabbos.
Take care, everybody, and a good Shabbos. Keep well.
Good Shabbos. Thank you, Rabbi. Good Shabbos to everybody.
Shabbos.